Today I'm talking to Dr. Melisa Wong from the Bedford Institute of Oceanography in Nova Scotia. Today we're talking in honor of World Seagrass Day. Hi, Dr. Wong. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. What is seagrass? I didn't even know what they really were before.
Well, I don't think you're alone in that, Robert. Seagrasses, they're kind of hidden from us because they are located in shallow subtidal areas along our coastline. So a lot of people don't ever really even see them. So seagrasses are actually marine plants that we find in the ocean. And they're the only marine plant actually that we have in the oceans. And they're very different from seaweeds like kelps and rockweeds. So seagrasses have evolved from land plants. So they look just like plants, right? They look kind of like grasses that we would see in a field. They have these leaves that come out of a shoot, and the shoot attaches to this rhizome, which is buried underneath the sediment. So you almost always find seagrasses in soft, muddy, or sandy, or slightly gravelly sediments. Now, seaweeds are actually much more simple. They tend to mostly attach to rocks through their holdfast, are fully marine plants, and have evolved in marine systems. Here's a picture of a seagrass meadow. And you can see it kind of forms these like underwater expansive meadows, right? It almost looks like a grassy field. And so you can see the seagrass is often like really strap-like or blade-like. This is also seagrass here. But sometimes the seagrass has a different kind of look to it. Like these ones are seagrasses, but they look more kind of loby and plant-like. So they can have different shaped leaves as well. So these four pictures here are all seagrasses. These ones here are seaweed. So these are kelps. This is rockweed. And then you can also have these algae that are more like turfs. So this looks kind of like a field, but they're all just really fluffy, short little seaweed.
Why are seagrass meadows so important?
One thing that seagrasses do is that they provide lots of complex kind of structured habitats. So they have all these grassy blades and these dense shoots, and animals really like to use that to kind of hide in this habitat and have protection from being eaten. These habitats provide lots of food for them. They can hang out in these areas as small fish and grow into larger fish. So seagrasses are really important for supporting fisheries and small juvenile or baby fish that are growing into adult fish. They're also really important because they provide all of this structure that a lot of animals kind of like. So there's lots of stuff living in the sediments like worms and things. And then there's also all these different types of fish. But then you also get things here in Canada, like the Canadian goose actually likes to eat the rhizomes of the seagrass plants. So the habitat's really important for biodiversity of animals. And then also seagrass habitats protect our shorelines. They dampen all the waves that come in, so it stops shorelines from washing away. And this is really interesting. The leaves that you see here and here, they're kind of waving around in the water. And as they're waving around in the water, they slow the water motion. So it slows down the water flow. And then all the particles that are in the water get trapped on the blades and get deposited or end up in the seagrass bed. So they're also really important for filtering and making the water clearer. They root down and they keep the sediment there so it doesn't wash away. And they're also important for capturing carbon. And then finally, they're really important because people really like seagrass beds. They're pretty and they're fun places sometimes to take your canoe in. So they have a lot of value in that way. So there's lots of stuff that seagrasses do that sometimes we don't know about, but they do all of these different things for us as humans. So that's why we think of seagrasses as being so important.
Are seagrass all over the world, like everywhere?
There's about 72 different species, and you can see these different colored green areas. Those are the different areas where seagrasses have been found. So they're found almost everywhere except for Antarctica. And I'm just showing some examples here of a few of the different types of seagrasses. So here, Thalassia testudinum is turtle grass, and it's called that because sea turtles eat it. And this Syringodium filiformes, that is a seagrass that manatees actually eat. Zostria marina is a seagrass species here in Canada, Posidonia, Inhalis, and Halophila.
How does seagrass fight climate change?
So they capture the carbon from the atmosphere or through the water column. They use that in photosynthesis, and then they use that to create carbon molecules and tissues. And then eventually those plants will die. It gets buried into the sediments, and it tends to stay buried there for a long, long time, like thousands of years. And there's not much activity going on in the sediments. There's not much oxygen, and not much can happen to it. So it just stays there and it doesn't really break down for a very long period of time. But the other way is how we talked about earlier, where the blades will capture the particles in the water. And those get taken down to the sediments and eventually get buried. And that really helps us fight some of these climate change issues.
Studies show that seagrass meadows worldwide have declined a lot since the 1800s. What has happened and why are they in trouble?
The main culprits that they have identified is number one, water quality, and number two, coastline development. So some of the ways in which water quality can become really bad is by doing things like having too much fertilizer running off from the land and entering the water, as well as things like sewage outflow or polluted waters coming into our coastal waters. And then the second one I mentioned was coastal development. So you can imagine as people build houses and roads and we infill harbors and build wharfs and things like that, very often some of the habitat gets destroyed. But there's other stuff as well. So damage from boats. There's also aspects more related to climate change. For example, marine heat waves can also cause mass die-offs of seagrass beds around the world.
What are we doing to help currently and what can we do?
A lot of times you can just do things that help the water that the seagrass lives in be more healthy, and that can really help these seagrass beds grow. But the other thing you can do is if a seagrass bed has disappeared, you can go out and collect plants from elsewhere and replant them.
Are there any success stories that you have?
I think you're coming to this idea that restoration of marine habitat can be really hard to do. You can plant seeds or put plants in the sediment, but it doesn't always take. But there has been some really successful projects that have done this. There's one place in Chesapeake Bay in the States where they used seeding techniques where they collect the seeds and they allow them to get to the point where they're able to grow on their own. And then they put those back onto the sediments and the plants have grown. And they've actually managed to restore a lot of lost areas of seagrass. So there are some success stories, even though it can be quite difficult and can take a lot of time and a lot of effort to do.
Yeah, it's better to take care of them in the first place instead of having to replant.
That's a very good point.
What would happen if we lost seagrass?
Seagrasses are not always replaceable. So here in Atlantic Canada, there's nothing really that does the same set of things for us that seagrasses do. So if we were to lose our seagrasses, we actually lose quite a lot.
What can kids do to help seagrass?
For kids that do live on the coast, there's lots that they can do hands-on. They could join a restoration project that often need volunteers because it takes a lot of people to replant those plants. You could pick up garbage along the shoreline and do things to protect our coastlines and our marine habitats. There's also lots of kids who don't live near seagrass beds. So one thing that they can do is that they can learn and be educated in the marine world and understand about the different things they do and talk about these things with their friends. And then if there's one thing that all of us can do, right, and that is to try and reduce our carbon footprint. We know that climate change affects all sorts of different marine habitats, including seagrasses. And so if we are to try and be a little less wasteful or try to reduce the types of activities we do that have impacts on our marine systems, that would be really great. So that's something that we can all strive for.
What do you wish more people knew about seagrass?
It would be great if more people just knew about seagrass in general, because you had mentioned you'd never heard about it, and a lot of people haven't heard about it. Even those of us who live on the coast haven't always heard about seagrasses because it tends to be an underwater habitat, so we don't even know it's there. I hope that through doing interviews like this and talking to the public and getting more and more people involved, that more people can kind of learn about seagrasses and everything they do for us and have an appreciation for seagrass habitats, which I guess is the whole point of World Seagrass Day, isn't it?
This has been a really great talk. Thanks so much for joining me today, Dr. Wong, and together kids can save the world. Thank you.
I agree. Thank you.